Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of Inside Boxing Daily. I'm your host for tonight, Jeremiah Preisser, and with me, as always, the amicable John Raspanti. How you doing, John?
Doing great, Jeremiah. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm always doing well, man. I woke up. I'm happy. You know, I got a family, got a wife. I'm good to go. But I will say,
Great.
I know, I don't want Mike to get on my butt about this, but we are brought to you by the Seat Giant. If you're looking for, something near the ring or whatnot, you go into a big fight. They actually had them for Golovkin, Lomachenko. If you go there, click the banner on the website, we get a little kickback. It'd be much appreciated. We're also brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation with Jackie Richardson and the fun Alex Ramos. So go check them out. A lot of these fighters, as I've said over and over again, they don't have 401k plans. It's a tough business. A lot of them end up pretty badly. So go over there and do what you can to help. And with that said, we are going to talk about something that I find particularly interesting, and it's not something that I see a lot of people talking about currently, even though I think it's highly relevant to what's going on. And you've heard people mention it in regard to the Golovkin-Derevyanchenko fight, but I don't see a lot of people just pinpointing the topic in particular and running with that. It's an odd thing because as polarizing as things can be anymore, whether it's politics or sports, I mean, we all know how that is. It's one of those things, like some people will say Golovkin is fighting this way, right? He's not looking as good as he used to because his competition level has gone up. Some people will say, well, he's been on a steady decline for so-and-so years. Personally, I'm of the opinion that he's been declining for a number of years. But you have these partisan groups saying, well, hey, it's either this or it's either that. Some people, I think, are a bit more rational and attribute it to both. And I fall somewhat in that middle camp there. But what do you think it is, John? What do you attribute to his performance?
I totally agree with you, Jeremiah. Anybody with some eyeballs has noticed that Golovkin has been declining. Actually, I think it began right around the Kell Brook fight, maybe even a little before that. Before that he'd get hit a little bit, but he still had some more of his. He's not fast, but he had his snap, and you could tell. I think he was right at the tail end of his prime. But what I should say is I should go back, because if you think about Golovkin, and this is the part that I really feel bad for Golovkin. There are a lot of people, not a lot. There are some people who really, it's just like you said, alluded to, dislike an athlete, say he's overrated, underrated, whatever. We'll leave that for another show. But Golovkin was 30 years old when he came to the United States. So his prime, his window was a small one. So when he hit like 34, he was already pretty much, in my view, starting to show that he was past it. So he's not going to get to another fight and then get it back. Now, we always know that the really good fighters have one good one left in them. We know that. But every fight for Golovkin, say his last 4 or 5 fights, you can see that he's lost a step, that he seems a little bit more tentative, that his reflexes aren't the same. And that always makes me think of Joe Louis. When Joe Louis was around 34, I think it was after he fought Jersey Joe Walcott the first time, and pretty much everybody thought he lost that fight, he said, I could be wrong, but I think it was around this time, like 1947, he said, I can see the openings, but I can't let the punches go. And I think that happened. I think that's maybe even happened a little bit with Golovkin, but it's more, he was never a very good defensive fighter anyway. You remember years ago, I'm sure, that when he came up, one of the complaints was when he was knocking everybody out was that he didn't move his head enough. And when we had Jonathan Banks on the Ringside Boxing Show, he was talking about trying to get him to move his head a little bit more. But as an old dog, again, old dog teaching an old dog new tricks, it's tough. So you combine everything, the 400 amateur fights, the 42 professional fights. your body, I think your body is on a clock for most people, and at some point you start to break down a little bit, and you lose just enough, and he's fighting the top guys, right? You're going to start having problems, and I think that's what's happened. Now, Derevyanchenko is 33, but Golovkin, when he was 33, I think that was about when you might have started to see a little erosion, but he was still damn good. So it's a toughie because everybody's different, I think. But I agree with you, though. Anybody that really has watched his fight since he first came to America, and even when he was fighting in the UK or around Ukraine or whatever, or Kazakhstan, I'm sorry, you could see. I mean, it's sports. It just happens, and that's just the natural order of things for most fighters, and that's what's happened with Golovkin, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I wrote extensively about this, about how it wasn't until he was 30 until he came to American shores, and he was actually primed for a shot at the bigger time much sooner than that 30. I would argue. Again, this is I documented this in a long article. It's called Unfulfilled Potential. How Golovkin got screwed by the system. Worth checking out. I'm just going to toot my own horn there, but just check it out.
Good. I remember. Yeah, it was very good. I remember.
Right, and so it's worth even going back further, in my opinion, because as you stated, this guy, his amateur record is often reported as 350-5. I think they've documented that he actually has 8 losses. So he may have less fights, may have more fights. Of course, anybody who's aware of the amateur system knows that kind of stuff is hard to keep track of, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not worth taking all of these at their face value. It's not, because from my experience, I had an amateur book myself. There's not a lot of oversight when it comes to that. They give you the book. You have people write these things in, but there's a lot of room for things to be, just not added in. So anyways, the thing about Golovkin, and you kind of mentioned the nuance of the situation where some people just don't have bodies built for punishment. You see that they're faded entities in their 20s. They have 1 or 2 fights, and they're pretty much done after that. Golovkin, to me, this makes him an extreme outlier. Has been on a slow, steady decline, I think, probably before the Kell Brook fight as well.
Yeah.
And the reason, my assumption is because, yes, he had 350-ish amateur fights, but it's also worth noting that, he was engaging in international tournaments at an early age. So when you're fighting the best guys available, even in the amateurs, even if these are only a few rounds, they take something out of you. You're training constantly. You're fighting constantly. It takes a toll on your body. But the thing that I find unique about Golovkin is here we are at 37 years old, whether he thought he lost the Derevyanchenko fight, whether he thought he won it. We're talking about a guy who's 37 years old and arguably beating, arguably losing, either way. It doesn't matter to me. But we're talking about a guy who is hanging with a top 3 to 6 middleweight, depending on what you like. Again, I'm on the transnational rankings board. We had him number 3 before the Golovkin fight, and much of that was weighed on his performance against Daniel Jacobs, where some people thought he won, but I think there was a clear majority that thought that Daniel Jacobs edged it. Still, we're talking about a guy who's hanging with then the 3rd best middleweight in the world behind Alvarez and Golovkin. So we know Derevyanchenko is operating at a high level. He also had an excellent amateur background. I think he had, if I'm not mistaken, 390 wins. Again, take this with a grain of salt. 390 wins, 12 losses. And then I don't think that's adding in his experience in the World Series of Boxing, which I believe was another 26 fights. So this guy is also, he's not a seasoned pro. You look at his record and you're like, wow, he's only had 15 fights. This guy's been doing it a long time as well. He knows his stuff. But the point to me is that when you look at the historical landscape of the middleweight division, I mean, let's just run through some of these because you were noting it off air, and I actually took the time to write some of this down before I got you on, and I'm looking at some of these guys, and again, there's a lot of nuance here. Okay, so some of these guys were in really tough fights early, some of them weren't. Again, there's a lot of nuance here, but when I look at a guy like Tony Zale, for instance, I see that he's pretty much done by, 34, I think. He's getting 35. Beat up by Serdan. Yeah, 35, correct. 35, he had I think he had both fights with Graziano at 34. Maybe I'm mistaken. It might have been 33, 34. Can't remember.
Yeah, right there, 46, 47, 1946, 47. So right there, close, yeah. And
then you have...
Yeah.
Right. And then you have Serdan, who was unfortunately gone by 33, but I think he lost his title at 32. You have LaMotta, who loses the belt at 28 and really isn't a player at middleweight any longer. You have Robinson, who in many people's eyes is the greatest to ever do it. He, in my case, is also an extreme outlier where it looks like he wins the title about 29, and then he's a contender pretty much up until 39 years old when he's fighting Gene Fulmer and arguably beat him. I don't know if it was I think it was the last fight or the third fight, but he won that fight to a lot of people. So again, you got about a decade range there. But then you just go through the list of these other guys. Fulmer, he's pretty much done at 32. Dick Tiger on the other side of it, he was pretty much done with the middleweight division by 36. Griffith about 35. Monzon about 34. Valdez 31. Coro very early at 25. Antifermo 28. Hagler 32. Leonard pretty much no longer a middleweight player at 33. Nunn 28. James Toney 24. Hopkins, another extreme outlier, pretty much 30 to 40 years old. Of course, he went on to do great things as well, so his fighting career was not done. But as a middleweight player, he was finished at 40. Jermaine Taylor, 27 to 29. Looks like Pavlik, 25 to 28. And these are really ages when they won the title and then when they lost the title. Of course, a lot of these guys were players a few years before. Then you had Sergio Martinez, 35 to 39. Cotto, again, lineal champ, whether, no matter how you feel about it, 33 to about 35, and, now we're about to Alvarez. So if you were to cut that down to about a median, I excluded Paul Pender. I missed Joey Giardello. There's a few other guys that you can sprinkle in there. But I think when you look at the median age for a champion and when they're about done, and a lot of these guys, mind you, were pretty much done as contenders when they lost the title. A few of these guys kind of fought on, but a lot of these guys didn't. They were pretty much done. I mean, Zale was certainly finished. Dick Tiger went on to do solid things at 175. Robinson hung around even a little while after he lost the title. Antifermo was pretty much done. Nunn ended up moving up to 168, and he actually became the lineal champ at 168, but it was a relatively new division, and he really didn't do a whole lot after that. He was ranked for a few years, but again, not really a major player. Jermaine Taylor fell off pretty quickly. Kelly Pavlik was done pretty quickly. So the point that I'm making is when you look at the median age for these champions, if you want to include title holders, I think that's fine because I don't think the data is it's not going to reflect much different. I mean, most of these guys are done about 30 years old. That's as a player altogether. Again, some of these guys can go on longer, some of them cannot. So to me, at 37 years old, it says something about Golovkin, not only in terms of fighting style, but how he's obviously been able to keep his body clean.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was thinking when you were going through that incredible list of the older fighters and then up to now. You didn't say anybody 37. You had a few of the anomalies, like you mentioned, Bernard Hopkins, for example. But Golovkin at 37. In a way, when we were thinking about it, Tony Zale and Golovkin, I kind of think were similar in the sense that, Tony Zale was called the man of steel, right? And Golovkin still has never been down as a professional, and that was the reputation for Tony Zale. He didn't start to hit the canvas until he got older, but for a while he did not ever get knocked down. And you look at them, to me, like that, it's like Golovkin is so durable still at his age, and that's what's very interesting, Jeremiah, is that in a sense we're really giving the props to Golovkin, and he deserves it, because whatever he's lost, like you said a little while ago, he's still a player in there. So what does that say? He's not what he once was, but he still can beat a lot of the top guys. Can he beat Canelo? No. But did he beat Canelo? I think so. So at this point, if this is the best that he can do, but forgetting all that again for a second, he's 37. So again, what he's doing, what he just did last weekend, how he hung in, and I believe he was ill too. We've heard that. He won't say anything, but Jonathan Banks told me he was. They don't want to make any excuses, but he wasn't feeling 100%. Not that it's an excuse. He would have had a hard time with Lomachenko no matter what, because the technician is that good. That's why that was such a wower fight when it got announced. It didn't get any buzz, which really frustrated me. But anybody, again, who knew something about boxing, when that fight was announced, were like, oh, boy, this is going to be a barn burner, and that's what it turned out to be. Again, Golovkin doing what he did, and what's happened to him. And as far as we were saying, and the way Canelo is now saying, which just drives me nuts, got to say it, oh, I beat him twice. Come on, Canelo. Don't say that, because that's just an insult to anybody who saw those fights. He deserves what he's getting, and he's gotten some criticism, mostly criticism. The boxing fans were booing, which was kind of rough in a way, because, okay, you might have thought he didn't win the fight last weekend, but he gave it everything he had, and so that was bothering me a little bit there in New York City. But we got to give it to Golovkin, because he is still a player. He still has skills, even though he's declining, and he's the IBF champ. Even if you don't consider that much of a title, he's there. So all props to Golovkin as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think I want to go back to what I was mentioning about the ages, because when we look at the guys who made it to, let's say 34, because that seems to be about that looks like the kind of the end point for a lot of these guys, 34, 35. I mean, that seems to be the farthest end for most of these men. Like you said, Tony Zale was 35. We also had Robinson. I think he was close at 39. But yeah, Emil Griffith was pretty much done at 35. Monzon close at 34. Again, Hopkins. So when you look at these guys, though, when you look at the guys who made it the furthest, the guys like Griffith, the guys like Hopkins, Sergio Martinez, Sugar Ray Robinson, these are not guys. I mean, Robinson was obviously a great puncher, but if you break down all of these guys, Golovkin is seen as sort of like the most aggressive, right. And much of his praise has been on his punching power for much of his career. And so right. What makes it even more impressive in my eyes is the fact that he's by and large seen as an aggressor, and he's been able to do this. Because we know how styles work in boxing. Guys like Floyd Mayweather, Bernard Hopkins, et cetera, those guys seem to last longer than the guys who take the shots, the guys who are the punchers. And so to me, it not only speaks to Golovkin's his health, the way he keeps his body clean, the fact that he's dedicated, but also it speaks to the fact that Golovkin's boxing skills are actually pretty damn good. And I think that's one thing that's altered perception when it comes to the Canelo Alvarez fights, for instance. It's because he's seen as the puncher, so a lot of people are expecting him to go in there and bang somebody out. But we're talking about a guy who at 34-plus years of age, right, he fought Daniel Jacobs at 34. I think he was close to 35 at that point. Fought. So in his last 7 fights, and I brought this point up on a forum earlier because somebody was – you know how boxing fans can be. They move the goalposts. They move the goalposts to suit their own agendas. And, I come across as a Golovkin fanboy because I feel like I'm defending him a lot. But we just have to be honest about what's going on and not, paint these pictures with a thick coat of whatever you want just because that's how you feel. I mean, the fact is that at 34-plus years of age, since 2017, we're talking about Golovkin has fought Daniel Jacobs, Alvarez twice, Martirosyan Rolls, and now Lomachenko. So if we look at – 4 of his last 6 fights have been against arguably the 3 best middleweights in the entire world. Canelo Alvarez obviously is. Daniel Jacobs was obviously ranked number 3. Lomachenko, again, you could have him 3 to 6, whatever, doesn't matter to me. But again, we're talking about a really and the Martirosyan fight, I don't think he's worth getting too much flack for because it wasn't his fault. I mean, it was Alvarez who was doing clenbuterol. So to me, we're looking at a guy who, at 34-plus years of age, 4 of his last 6 have been against arguably the 3 best middleweights in the entire world, and he's beating them. He's not going out there and knocking them out. The one thing that I've tried to argue is the jab is probably his best asset. He's got great balance, fantastic jab. My brother's a trainer at a local gym, and we talk often about it because it's almost like anybody who watched football in the 90s and the 80s, they remember a guy named Dan Marino. Not a very good player, but my father and my brother were big Dolphin fans, so I grew up watching a lot of Dan Marino, and one thing everybody praises him on is his release. His release was very quick, right? There was almost no slack in his technique, and when I look at Golovkin's jab, that's kind of what I think of. There's almost no slack, right? That's one thing that makes a difference between a landed punch and a punch that doesn't land is a lot of guys have these, you don't want to call them ticks, but they have these tip-offs, if I want to use maybe a card reference, but they show their hand ever so slightly before they throw a punch, right? Maybe they'll drop the right hand, maybe they'll feint the same way all the time. Golovkin, to his credit, it pretty much just comes straight in, straight out, right? Just from his body to the head, and that's why slick guys like like Alvarez, good defensive fighter, and Daniel Jacobs. This is why even as Golovkin is slower than these guys, clearly he's still landing clean, effective jabs, and that's on top of his fantastic balance, his wonderful accuracy. And you go back to the Lomachenko fight, and it goes to what you're saying. It's like it looks like he couldn't pull the trigger, like he was thinking a bit too much. Like he just couldn't quite doing it, and he looked a bit slower. His punches didn't look as accurate. It just didn't look there for him. But again, at 37, he's clearly the second best middleweight in the world. I mean, guys like Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo, they're certainly up there. These are obviously guys who have talent, but in terms of resume, there's just no comparison. But I would like to ask you, where would Golovkin go from here? Would you like to see the Alvarez fight? I mean, personally, it's tough because Alvarez is better, Golovkin is worse. It only seems as if the result is going to be a bit clearer.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. And I know what you mean about defending Golovkin because I tend to do the same thing, and I don't consider and I know you don't either. I don't consider us big fanboys. We admire him. We respect what he's done. We recognize his abilities, his talents. I love his jab too. It's just it's so textbook. And when he uses it and he keeps popping it, it's so impressive. The thing that people tend to forget, again, which bothers me, is that when Golovkin was really in pretty much his prime, I would say 31, 32, right up in there, maybe at the edge of his prime or whatever, he couldn't really find any top-ranked guys to fight him. You know, he was fighting what was given him. And Canelo and his team, and we know this is a fact, they were waiting. They were waiting for him to get older, enough to recede a little, decline a little, that, okay, we can beat him. And then that begs the question. Okay, it was a draw and a split decision. But was it fair? See, no, I don't think so. I've watched the Canelo-Golovkin first fight a number of times. Golovkin won that fight, in my opinion. Even the second fight, you could make an argument that he won. And this is an older, declining Golovkin. So that's another way for me, as far as I'm concerned, that he got screwed. And that bothers me. Now, where he goes from here, if I'm his team, at this point, the way it looks, I don't want to see a Canelo-Golovkin third fight. I don't think – I even believe that Canelo might even stop him in a third fight. The way he's getting hit, if he gets hit like that again, it reminded me a little bit, Jeremiah, with Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. when he started to get hit against Zua, you know, when he got knocked down and he was way past his prime. And you just don't want to see that, you know. I think the best way to go is a rematch with the Derevyanchenko. You know, let's do that. I mean, Golovkin made $15 million. You know, if I'm his team, I'm saying, look, we'll fight him again. The people want to see it. I'd love to see it again. I'm sure you would too. Let's get healthy. Let's maybe see if we can get a little more money. Got $15 million. Let's get 20. And if he loses, which is obviously very possible, at least he could go out if he retires with $20 million more dollars in his pocket. And I think that would be the best way to go. He's going to have a tough matchup if he ever fights Andrade, if he ever fights somebody like Billy Joe Saunders, because they move and he would be stalking and he'd probably lose decisions to them. He would have had a hard time with them before based on his style, but he was so good at cutting off the ring a few years ago, if you remember. And
oh, yeah.
It didn't seem like he does that like he used to either. And I'm sure that's age too. He hasn't forgotten how to do any of this. It's just the age thing. So if I'm his team, I'm thinking, yeah, I want that rematch because, one, I think we can do better. I do. I think he could do better in the rematch, especially since I believe that he wasn't 100%. I think he can do better. Now, does that mean he's going to win? Not necessarily. But I think he can do a few more things. But if he's declined more by the time they get back in the ring, because it'll be next year, right? He'll be getting closer to 38 by then. That's what I mean. If he loses, at least he goes out with a big paycheck. So he's in a tough spot as that goes. He's really on the back end of his career. I hope he's got some people who are honest in telling him that, to be realistic. If Canelo suddenly says he wants to fight him, it's just because he sees him as easy pickings now, which wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, well, yeah, Golovkin's birthday is, I believe it's in April, so it's likely he'll be 38 by the time his next fight rolls around. Yeah, and I did find that one of the more striking features too is his footwork is actually excellent, but you know, when you watch him against these guys, he just doesn't seem to do. It's like you see Derevyanchenko circling around him. And he just doesn't seem, all around, he just doesn't seem as quick on the trigger. And I think the Derevyanchenko rematch is a good idea. I also think that, and I don't think many, and this is the thing, is I've already seen speculation that Golovkin might fight Kamil, how do you say his name? Zaramita. I can't remember the Polish guy who actually fought on the undercard. And he was actually in Golovkin's sights around the Vanes Martirosyan fight. They had talked about bringing him in, and he was a damn good amateur. He's currently ranked in the top 10 by Transnational and The Ring. He's a good fighter, not much power. But here's my thing is Golovkin, because of his stature, if he doesn't fight somebody like Derevyanchenko, he's going to get a lot of crap for it. But I think we all need to understand that guys like Golovkin, Manny Pacquiao, all these other guys, they've put in their service, and they should be given a bit more leeway in terms of choice opponents. Like you said, if somebody in his camp is wise enough to say and has a direct access to his ear and can influence him, he's like, hey, Golovkin, you just don't got what you don't have what you used to. Let's play it a bit safer and try to maximize our revenue before you move on to promoting, because he's obviously been doing some of that too. That's part of the reason why he has to deal with his own. You saw some of his prospects on the end of the card who look quite good, actually. But if I don't think if they choose that route, I mean, they're being realistic about the whole situation, which I would think a lot of people should be happy about, because that's the way they would manage their own careers. Is that if he doesn't fight Derevyanchenko, or they think that's too much even at this point, fight somebody like Riyado Murata, who is huge in Japan. I think he had something like 25 million viewers for his rematch with Rob Brandt. So obviously he sells well. He's with Top Rank. The promotion will be good. Fights like that. I mean, we're still talking about a guy who's clearly a top 10 guy in Murata, but somebody who sells well, because he was already on the radar before. But that's what I would like to see. Somebody like Murata. Once you get past the top 5, once you get past Andrade and Charlo and Murata, you got guys like David Lemieux, who was already beaten and is moving up to 168, Rob Brandt, who just lost in a rematch to Murata, Zaramita, who I just talked about. So there's not a whole lot of options. I suppose, though I don't think Golden Boy would want to give this up, I suppose you could also get a fight with Jaime Munguia. That is obviously going to sell well, though personally I think Munguia is being tailor-made for a Canelo fight. I don't think they can resist the allure of putting, Mexicans like that together and reaping the rewards, especially since it's in-house. So to me, I'd like to see Golovkin face somebody like Murat. Murata, he lacks the nuance that Derevyanchenko has. He comes forward. He's a good puncher, not a great puncher. Good work rate, not great work rate. To me, that would make sense. So would the Derevyanchenko fight. But I think those are both good options, and I think we need to be a bit more reasonable in how we approach this as fans. I think it's quite all right to say, hey, we're just going to take it a little bit easier. We're going to let off the gas just a bit, because what's the saying in golf? He's headed towards the back nine or something.
Yeah, he's on the back nine of his career, yeah. And no, that's a really good opponent too, Murata. I hadn't thought about him, and he was very impressive in the rematch with Rob Brandt. I mean, he came out on fire. He wanted to prove that the Brandt victory was a fluke, and he just blew him out. He was all there. So you could imagine against Golovkin, who doesn't like to back up, even though he does now more than he used to. But Golovkin, with that jab that we were talking about, he would be stopping Murata in his tracks with that jab. And here I go again with Joe Louis again. That's the one thing that Joe Louis never lost, was his jab. He couldn't fire the right hand like he once could, but his jab was just almost as good as it was when he was 24 as when he was 37, when he fought Rocky Marciano, 1951. So Golovkin will always have that, which is good. And against a guy like Murata, who's a good fighter, that would be I'm already thinking to myself, and I'm sure this probably crossed your mind too, that would turn out to be a Pier Sixer. That would be quite a fight between those two, and that might even be nice too for Golovkin in a sense. He would go to Japan probably to fight him. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe they'd be worried about fairness. I doubt it. I mean, he's an international star, Golovkin.
Yeah, so Japan actually seems like one of the places where guys generally get a fairer shake.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. And that's why they probably would do it, because they would figure they'd get a fair shake. And I don't think a fight between those two is going the distance anyway. I think right now I'm thinking if Golovkin is anywhere like if he's a little better than he was last weekend, he could beat Murat. But that is, again, this might be a 50-50 fight, because I don't know what Murat shows up. The one first fight against Brandt wasn't really all there, but the second fight he was on fire. Now you would think he would be totally motivated against Golovkin. So I'm going to assume that he's going to be the guy that fought Brandt the second time. So you're talking about a really good fight here between those two guys, and that's a good option, Jeremiah. If I was his team, I would certainly like that one too, because he'd make a lot of money. Obviously, he's got a guaranteed contract with the Zone, and it would be a fan-friendly fight, I think.
Yeah, that was my thinking. Again, I know he's already been on Tom Loeffler's radar, because I remember they were talking about that fight before the first Rob Brandt fight, because it was being thrown around there, and guys like my buddy Michael Montero were talking about it, and they were like, yeah, it's a possibility. He said, and they were saying some of the same things that I'm just repeating. That hey, he's fun, he sells well, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So I think that's a good option, and I don't think, again, I'm going to repeat myself because I think it's worth repeating, is that we shouldn't be giving Golovkin that much crap for his choice of opponents at this stage. If he does something like that that's a bit safer, still maximizing money, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's like the same thing with Manny Pacquiao. Yeah, you would like to see him maybe against Errol Spence because of their stature in the welterweight division. They're on the same side of the aisle. But to me, Pacquiao can do what he wants when he wants. He earned his stripes a long time ago, and now is just this is where, with a lot of these guys who are contenders and whatnot, as a fan, I feel like they shouldn't take the prize fighting so literally. Like I understand that you need money, maybe you have a family, et cetera, but you want to see guys who become contenders fight other contenders. You just want to see those questions answered, right? Like how you'll see guys who are 40 fights in, and you're like, well, I don't know what his chin is. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what he's got because he hasn't been tested. Guys like Golovkin and Pacquiao, like I said, they've already earned their stripes. We shouldn't be as hard on them as we are on other people. And when you talked about Joe Louis's jab, I thought that was interesting too, because it struck me as obviously that's one of the reasons why Golovkin is so good at his age, because his jab is that good. I mean, he was the jab was pretty much the fundamental punch in the Jacobs fight and both Alvarez fights, and he out-jabbed Derevyanchenko too. And so obviously this is a key, but that's one thing you see at heavyweights when you talk about Joe Louis is, Mike made a list of the best fighters of best heavyweights of the 1990s, and Larry Holmes made the cut. I think I've been sharing it, but I think he made the cut at number 9. And Larry Holmes is one of those guys who's often put in the hat of best jabbers of all time. And I think because, right, I mean, you look at what he did even up until 45 years old, where he damn near beat Oliver McCall.
Yeah, he did.
Did you see the list, by the way?
I did not see the list, no.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I'll just run over that because we'll just chit-chat about that for a minute before I let you get on your way, because I do think it is interesting, and I do like hearing feedback on this because
let me just say this real fast. So you know about a jab, Jeremiah? Kovalev, who's fighting Canelo here November 2nd, he has a very, very good jab. And it's that European thing again, too. And Kovalev is not what he was. Kovalev is past his prime. All the cliches. He's on the back 9. We know that. But he still got a hell of a jab. Look what it did to Yarde in the 11th round. Now, Yarde was exhausted. He shot his wad trying to knock him out a few rounds before that, let's be honest. But That is a strong jab. You just asked Andre Ward how hard that jab is, and he talks about that jab all the time. So there's another guy that might not be the crusher that he was, but he's got that jab. So when you got that jab, plus he's got a really smart trainer in Buddy McGirt's corner, it gives you, a good shot against anybody. And there you go. I was saying that he's 36. See, so he's right there too. So that jab, man, that is really an important punch.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's as people have already elaborated on countless times, it's probably the most important punch. I mean, you look at what Paulie Malignaggi was able to do with pretty much just the jab. I mean, obviously he had good foot movement, he had quick hands, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just the jab, but yeah, it is impressive what you can do when you've got a good jab. I mean, Kovalev, not only does Kovalev have a great jab technically, but it's so powerful. I mean, this is, I've argued, I made up a list a while back about, the hardest punchers in boxing. I mean, years ago, I thought he was obviously one of the hardest punchers in boxing because he does things that, and again, I'm not saying he's Bob Foster, right. I'm not saying that, but I am saying he's near that discussion of greatest light heavyweight punchers, in my opinion, because of, I just think it's so obvious how powerful he is, because he knocked a guy. I think he's knocked two guys out. Maybe it's three. Maybe I'm going to try to get this right here, but he knocked Ismail Salah, who's we've heard his name, and he was a very good amateur. He knocked him out cleanly with a jab. He broke Cedric Agnew's rib with a jab, and he punished Jean Pascal, who still obviously has a little bit left, punished him in two fights, especially the rematch, and he knocked Ward down with a right hand, which didn't connect.
But he hurt him he hit him with that jab a lot of times. Ward had never been with that in his career. Yeah.
Well, and you can see in the Alvarez fights, the Alvarez rematch in particular, how when you listen to the commentary, and Andre Ward, to his credit, has done a damn good job over at ESPN. They were commenting and talking about how Kovalev basically just boiled his style down to the basics. But even when he wasn't punching with real authority, he still had enough on his shots. They were still heavy enough to keep Alvarez honest, to where he couldn't get wild.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, very true. Very true. And Kovalev is another one that I think people don't like him, and I know why, and you know why, but we're just talking about a boxer and his skills here. And he's another guy that he was knocking out everybody with ease and punishing everybody and dominating everybody. And I remember when he fought Bernard Hopkins, I'm sure you remember this, we were thinking, well, Bernard Hopkins will outsmart him like he did to Kelly Pavlik. Boy, the crusher knocked him down in the first round, I believe it was the first round, and just dominated Bernard Hopkins like nobody did, even when Hopkins was an older fighter. And he had that small window again. He was another one with that little small window. But that jab is his key now, and I think he's actually a smarter fighter now than he was when he was younger, probably because he has to be. So he's a smart fighter. He's changed his style a little bit, and again, he's another guy. Even though he's older, he's still got a lot of game. And that rematch victory over Alvarez was really impressive, and not a big shocker, but still he had to go out there and do it, and he did it. And I don't think he gets enough credit. He's another one. I think it's like anything. Maybe do an analogy with a baseball player in a sense, when a guy's a home run hitter and he stops hitting the home runs a lot, and people go, well, what's going on? He used to hit 40 home runs. Now he's only hitting 20. What's happening here? Has he lost something? And then people take it for granted that boxing fans, and I think boxing fans are the hardest fans of anybody on fighters, that he's not doing what he used to do. Well, are you doing what you used to do 5 years ago? I mean, be honest. So it's
yeah. No, it's like, the people, like a lot of the people criticizing these people, they like, I've got a couple kids and we've got, birthday parties and whatnot. And you see some of these people, 5 years later, and you're like, yeah, that's not a prime Tony, But,
right.
We're all sitting around like Al Bundy watching, yelling at the TV.
Yep.
That is one of the funny things about it. But it is, you got to give Kovalev credit not only because of his jab, but, I mean, you even listen to the fight. That's one thing that I think Andre Ward got wrong was, he was talking about, because Kovalev had gained the reputation of having little heart, right? He seemed like he was one of those guys when the going got tough, he was going to pack it in, right?
So.
And they were saying that during the Yard fight.
Yeah.
And what does Kovalev do? He's in a sticky situation in round 8, I believe it was, round 9,
Yep.
one of those. He looked like he might be on his way out, and then he comes in the very round after and dominates Yard, and then ends up.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that's the other fight that I was thinking of. And then he stops Yard with a jab.
Yeah. Yeah, and the jab in the 11th round, right? Knocked him down, knocked him out in a sense. Yardy was exhausted, but he went down hard, and he just stepped in with that jab. It was powerful. You're right, really fast. That's not fair on Kovalev. Andre's wrong about that. I hope that doesn't stick with him with whatever happens in his life, because he's got heart. He proved that. He dug down deep. He had to do it against Alvarez, too, in the rematch. He got rattled a few times, and he hung in there, and he fought back, and he's definitely got heart. Now, the whole thing about taking shots to the midsection, that's another argument for another day. But as far as having a fighter's heart, he's got a big one.
Yeah, and I do want to ask you, and I will let you go soon, but you talk about a baseball player. Cause I used to be a big baseball fan in the 90s and early 2000s. Then I kind of got out of football and basketball and baseball and pretty much just got down to boxing. That's been the mainstay in my sports diet from then. But I'm trying to think of an example of a baseball player who was like that. Can you give me one, a guy who was like cranking out? Because 30 home runs used to be a big deal. I mean, I remember watching baseball in the 90s, and a guy like Fred McGriff was hitting, just about 28 to 34 every year, and he was considered a home run hitter. And then all of a sudden, guys came out looking like muscles, and Mark McGwire and Sosa and
Sammy Sosa,
yeah, Barry Bonds and all these guys were cranking them. And the only person that I wasn't highly suspicious of was Ken Griffey Jr., who part of that was probably because he was my favorite player, but also I thought it was just his eye and his swing. But I'm trying to. Was there a baseball player like that who was cranking 40 out, and then all of a sudden he's more of he becomes a good contact hitter?
Not that black and white, but I know there was some. I'm thinking about, and this is going to be wrong because I don't follow baseball like I used to either. But I'm thinking about a guy, and I'm going way back, by the name of Dale Murphy for the Atlanta Braves, who was hitting 40-some home runs. And the point is that he hit 40 home runs for a few years, and then suddenly he wasn't hitting 40 home runs anymore. And he had declined a little bit, but he was still hitting 25 to 30. That's the point. I mean, it wasn't like he was some bum, but to a lot of, and I hate that word. I never use that word with boxers because that's so disrespectful. But the fact that he wasn't the guy that he was, people were just throwing him under the bus, and that's what I'm equating this to with the boxers, is that, hey, you're not going to be what you were when you were younger. But there's a few, and a number of years ago, I would have probably been able to just think of a few off the top of my head of baseball players. But they have years where they hit a lot of home runs, and then they don't. Another one that popped into my head was Carl Yastrzemski, who hit over 40 home runs once, but then he, as he got older, he turned into more of a not a singles and doubles guy, but I think he hit 15 to 20, maybe 25, but he was very consistent. So it was kind of an up and down thing, but that was back in compared to nowadays, like the dead ball era, where somebody hit 44 home runs. It was amazing, So it happens, but the point is that I think you might just lose a little bit, but you're still good. That's the point, and even great in some ways. But as fans, we're like, hey, what's going on? We're spoiled. I think that's the best way to say it. We just get spoiled by their talents.
Yep, and unfortunately, because some fans are hypercritical of guys' careers, it takes, half a decade or so until they're truly appreciated for what they gave us.
Yes, exactly, and that's hard too, and that happens in boxing. I think this is going to sound kind of strange, but I think in a way, talking about Pacquiao, I believe that in some respects, forgetting all the steroid controversy and all that, but what he recently did against Keith Thurman was phenomenal as far as I'm concerned. Phenomenal. And he got a lot of credit for it and everything, but I kind of believe that he's going to be talked about more years from now. And then there's another guy by the name of Henry Armstrong that I think you know that people don't talk about, who should talk about. I mean, not some of us talk about Henry Armstrong, but he had a run where it was incredible what he was doing, just incredible. And I don't know what it is that sometimes people don't want to appreciate what's right there in front of them until 5, 6, 7 years later they go, wow, that guy was really good. It's like, well, duh. It's like the great artists, like Van Gogh, for example. Now we're getting into Van Gogh isn't appreciated until he's dead. Edgar Allan Poe struggles his whole life, and then he dies at 40 in Baltimore. And within a few years, people are calling him a genius. So, I don't know what it is about society that happens with some of these guys, but I guess I'll just say that it has something to do with the fact that we're spoiled by what's going on, and we don't realize that this isn't going to last forever. And I think athletes forget that too. This is a little short window of time that we're going to witness this, and it's going to be over. And while it's happening, we're just, we expect it. Yeah, he won by blah, blah, blah. Not going, man, this guy, we got to enjoy this guy every minute of his fights or whatever, or baseball games or football games. He's really good. And I think kind of that's what happens.
Yep, and it's worth noting, in my opinion, that what perspective I think is worth adding to is not only how we talk about guys who became champions, right, but guys who just play the game in general. I mean, your window as an athlete, whether you're some guy who's being fed to prospects and losing, you're doing that on a local level, or, you're a world champion. Most of these guys do not last long, period. Right. I mean, the average NFL player's, like 4 years, 3-4 years? I mean, the fact that some of these guys are able to do it for a decade plus. You look at a guy like Roberto Duran, who was able to do it for so long. I mean, I think we've really got to move the discussion out of being so critical about all these guys. Again, if you don't like a guy, I've really got no problem with that, because it's the way humans are. We're very discriminatory. Like somebody might see somebody who wears blue and they're like, well, I hate that shade of blue, or I don't like how he wears his hair. I really understand that. I really do. I get it. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm not saying you should hate a guy because of his hair, because of this or because of that. I'm just saying I understand why, we're so nitpicky about the things we like and dislike. That's fine. If you don't like this guy because he's, like Marcus Brown, for instance, if you don't like him because of his domestic incidences, that's fine. That's perfectly okay with me. But I still think we need to understand, and I kind of attribute it to music, because this is the way I am with music, is I'll listen to a guy if he's a I don't know, some like dyed-in-the-wool communist or something. If his music is good, sometimes you need to learn to take the athlete for what he is inside the ring, as opposed to what he is outside the ring. I mean, it's get guys like Beatles and John Lennon and all that. You hear some of the stuff that he did. And also, anyways, what I'm trying to say is you need to be less critical about what these guys offer, because there are very few people. If you go look at the middleweight rankings and you see that there's over 1,500 guys ranked in the world, and some of these guys if you get ranked in the top 500, you're actually not doing that bad for yourself in comparison. You're actually not that bad. You get in the top 30, you get in the top 20. That's an achievement unto itself. And I just think we need to change the discussion around all this and learn to appreciate these guys for what they bring to the table a little bit more than what we do, and stop falling into these camps where you got to shit on everybody or shit on somebody no matter what they do.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen it with Lomachenko. And I just roll my eyes and I go, what can you possibly criticize? Okay, maybe he fought a few guys that weren't in his, but who's in his level? You're blaming him for fighting. I'm trying to think of the guy from London that he fought in Los Angeles. What was his name? They fought
Anthony
him in
Crolla.
Crolla, right? Knocked him out in the fourth round, dominated him. Well, that's just the way it is sometimes. Lomachenko is another one of these guys that I compare to a great artist. That, we know how good he is, and he's great. And I don't throw the great around. I think he's a great fighter. I do. I love to watch that man fight. I love to watch his technique. I love to watch the way he uses his legs. I love the way he bobs and weaves. He's not perfect, of course. You can find fault with him if you want, but he's a great fighter.
You better get your microscope out for that.
Exactly. So he's 31. I think he's 32 now. See, so his window is getting smaller. And he's not going to be around forever. So stop putting these guys under the microscope and finding flaws with them. Enjoy the elite, the really good ones. Terrence Crawford, for example, is another one that I have up there. You can find fault with anybody. You can find fault with human beings in anything they do. In the writing department, like us, Jeremiah, anything we do in this show, people can find fault if you want. But Look at what like a guy like Lomachenko does. Look what he brings. Look what he's doing in the boxing ring. You think that's easy? I mean, anybody who's ever tried to box, like I sparred a few times. I played every sport in my life, Jeremiah. Boxing was the hardest thing that I ever attempted to do, and I did it for a number of months when I was young. I was young once. Where's my cat? I was like 29 years old. And I was in really good shape, weighed about 170 pounds, and I was working out. And to make a long story short, I ended up sparring a guy 3 rounds. We had a couple of fights, and you're hitting the heavy bag fine, you're hitting the speed bag fine, but you get in there with another human being, and you're trying not to think, and you're trying to be instinctive, and you got to trying to move your head a little bit and pop your jab out there. That was tough. I mean, I was exhausted after 3 rounds. 3 rounds, and I was in good shape. So, I mean, people should stop with some of this crap and oh, well, he's not fighting this guy or he's not fighting this. Come on, man. I mean, some of these guys are just superior athletes. Enjoy them. Don't criticize. If you want to criticize them a little bit, fine, if that's in your nature. But also make sure you compliment them because they deserve it. And then a lot of things other people forget, too, is how long these guys train. You know, they're training 2-3 months for the fight that we all tune in to watch for 2 hours, right? 2-3 months they're doing this, sacrificing, watching their weight, eating a certain way. These guys are phenomenal athletes, and I agree with you. Not just the top guys, the guys that are ranked in the top 30, the top 100. This is a commitment, and it deserves respect, and it deserves credit for what they achieve.
Yep, and I would end with Golovkin as an example since that's where we started. The thing about Golovkin that really chaps my ass when it comes to fans criticizing him is he is who you would want a champion to be. He's dedicated. He lives cleanly. He keeps his family out of the limelight. Yep. He doesn't really talk bad about guys unless, he was talking bad about Alvarez, because of the drug situation. But this is a guy, by and large, who's respectful. He's dedicated. He goes in the ring. At 37 years of age, he is still must-see TV. This is a guy who is, if you were crafting a champion, this is about the guy you would get. I mean, he's dedicated his life to the sport, and for people to not be ungrateful for, oh, I don't know, he's not fighting who they want him to fight in his next go-round, it strikes me as so damn shallow, and you're just ignoring so much of the nuance that's there. He's such a good figure, good guy for the sport. I wrote about this in my article about the the unfulfilled potential and whatnot. He is one of those guys like Marvin Hagler. He's one of those guys who doesn't seem that affected by silk sheets, right? Yeah, he's living nicely. He's collecting big paydays, but he's still getting out there and doing the road work like he didn't have anything. And that's a really, really tough thing to do. The guy's just classy. He's given his life to sports. Let's just be a little respectful when it comes to these athletes.
Exactly. And how many fighters do you see after the fight last weekend who says, I'm paraphrasing, it was not a very good night for me. All the credit to my opponent. He was really tough. A good night for his team. Something like that. He said, how many fighters do you hear say that? Giving the credit to the guy that you won officially. He knew that the fight was definitely up for grabs. I mean, he's given all the kudos to his opponent. You don't see that nowadays. You used to see that more years ago. Not always, but sometimes nowadays. Think of someone who has done that before. Give the credit. So that's what when you said classy. I mean, that's exactly what he is. He's always been very classy. What he said about Canelo, I didn't blame him. He was frustrated. He's a clean athlete. He said what a human being would say. Hey, man, I'll fight you, but you got to be clean. How could you do this? I didn't blame him for saying that kind of stuff. He's a human being. So, it just frustrates me too to no end. He's a poster boy for what an athlete should be as far as the way he handles himself, the way he treats his opponents, the way he's committed, the way he works out, everything he does. And some of the comments, I don't know, Jeremiah. I just think people don't have enough going on in their lives or something. I just shake my head and roll my eyes. Like, come on, I know you understand this.
Yeah, I know you're dumb, but you can't be that dumb.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you see a lot of that. I mean, it's Golovkin, Lomachenko. We're talking about guys who are consummate professionals, and they want to fight the best guys available. I mean, I don't know what else you'd like. Anyways, I know where some of this comes from, and it's not a good place. Anyways, it looks like you're working on something, John. You working on a new book there?
It's done, Jeremiah. Thanks for mentioning it. I'm working on getting it uploaded to Amazon now. It's called Blood on My Notebook: Dispatches from the World of Professional Boxing. The title comes from a real life incident that happened to me years ago when I was ringside at a little arena in San Francisco, a rock's throw away from Kezar, where Marciano fought in the 50s. So, but I was really my seating location was right on the edge of the ring apron, Jeremiah. So that's where I had my notebook sitting there. I'm gazing up at two guys throwing bombs at each other. One gets hit, and I feel the misty, bloody stuff dripping. And I look, and there it is on my notebook. And I said to myself, if I ever write a book, it's going to be called Blood on My Notebook. So that is the one. I'm hoping that it's going to be available on Amazon, which is kind of a horror show, by Halloween, maybe a little after that. But that's the goal. But yeah, it's 99% done, and I'm really, you'll know when it's on Amazon, because I'll be putting it all over the place. But yeah, it's a collection of a lot of articles I've written, a few that nobody's ever read as far as other than myself and maybe a few people in my family. One's even a short story that I wrote about. I was at a boxing event in San Francisco again, and something happened, and I got inspired, and I went home and I wrote this short story. So it's a labor of love. We'll just leave it at that. And I'm anxious for people to read it. I hope they like it. You hope for the best. Got a forward from my friend Randy Shields. So very nice of him to do that. So yeah, I'm very excited about it. Like I said, hopefully right around my birthday's in November, so I'm hoping to give myself a birthday present and have it, either late October or sometime in November on Amazon.
All right. Well, I mean, that's on top of the book you did with Dennis Taylor, the Intimate Warfare, the story with Gotti and Ward. Check that out. Check out the book that is going to come out. And as always, I thank you for coming on, John.
Oh, my pleasure. And real fast, Jeremiah, on The Grueling Truth, we're going to have Carlos Palomino this weekend. Dennis and I are interviewing him tomorrow, and he was at the Staples Center to witness the Spence Porter fight, so that ought to be fun. Anybody who knows something about boxing remembers the King, Carlos Palomino. What a great guy he is, too, Jeremiah, by the way. And so that's coming up this weekend. So, yeah, always a lot of great stuff going on.
Yep, you guys always have great guests on. So, again, just go to the website. I mean, you guys got to buy the books and everything, too. I know I'm asking a lot out of you, but that's okay. I mean, this is all for the better anyways. But, yeah, go to the website. Check out some of the old interviews. You will be informed. And, as always, we're brought to you by Seat Giants. Click the banner on the website, yada, yada, yada. Go to the Retired Boxers Foundation. Give a little if you can. Alex Ramos and Jackie Richardson are over there. And so with that, I'm your host, Jeremiah Preisser. With me was John Raspanti. Have a good night.